So I think there are trade-offs and there are balances. There are macronutrient balances, carbohydrate, fat, protein. There are balances within the fatty acids that I've been talking about, saturated, unsaturated, omega 6 poly, omega 3 poly. These are all balances. We could call them trade offs, as you've said, that all result in different metabolism, different physiology, and different predisposition to disease through their impact on risk factors. And, people could sort of make their own luck, if you like, by good luck or bad luck through their dietary choices. Um, but at the same time, a healthy diet seems to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, reduce the risk of a lot of cancers, maybe delay the onset of dementia. So, a generally healthy diet can have multiple effects at prolonging both lifespan and health span, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and that kind of that was a great description, by the way, and I think, that my next question is sort of if we go back to that person who, let's just say they're going out of their way to consume high amounts of linoleic acid
Yeah,
and
yeah,
out of their way to small amounts of omega-3, like they're avoiding fish
yeah, yeah,
altogether,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
avoiding
yeah,
supplementation and
yeah,
whatnot. What are some of the risk factors, if we know of
yeah,
them, that they would
yeah,
probably experience with that sort of an approach?
yeah, yeah. So, I think a diet low in omega 3s, particularly EPA and DHA, but omega 3s in general, is not desirable. And I think maybe we have to consider, Zach, later on in our discussion, sources of omega 3s beyond the ones I've talked about, which are fish based. So, what we know is if we go the other way round, if we give people higher amounts of omega 3s, we know we can beneficially impact a lot of risk factors that are pre existing in individuals. And of course, this is done in research studies, but the people we study are sort of representative of the population. So, for example, omega 3s, I've already talked about inflammation. So one of their main roles is helping to keep inflammation under control. Okay, so you still get physiological inflammation, but you don't get pathological inflammation. And people may not really be aware, but inflammation is really important as a risk factor in lots of the things we've already talked about. So inflammation increases risk of heart disease. Inflammation promotes an environment where cancers thrive. We think what we call neuroinflammation. So inflammation in the brain is a component of cognitive impairment leading to dementia, but also plays a role in psychiatric and psychological conditions. Inflammation is part of metabolic disease. So in a person who becomes obese, there's more inflammation in their adipose tissue, and that is harmful. So inflammation is really important, and therefore the effects of EPA and DHA to reduce the inflammatory burden in the body are really important. So that's one example. Omega 3s also promote heart health through effects on the heart cell membranes. So they help reduce heart rate a little bit. They also reduce blood pressure a little bit uh, in people who are not taking antihypertensive medication, of course. Um, they reduce a type of fat in the blood, lower a type of fat in the blood that we haven't mentioned, which is triglycerides. Triglycerides are a risk factor also for heart disease. They're different from cholesterol. So, omega 3s have a range of effects on risk factors, mainly acting through controlling metabolism, controlling gene expression, and changing how cell membranes are functioning. Okay. They reduce blood clotting, which can be a good thing in some situations. So I think if you have a diet without enough of omega 3s, the result is you have higher triglycerides, you have more inflammation, you might have slightly higher blood pressure, and so on. So I wouldn't personally favor a situation where and all of these things are made worse because of this opposing action of omega 3s and omega 6s. A diet low in omega 3s is made worse for the person if it's very high in omega 6s. So, this is all about, we discussed balance already, but
Mhm,
this is all about balancing these different families so you get optimal cell function.
mhm.
So, I would never advise a diet very high in omega 6s and very low in omega 3s. I don't think that is compatible with optimal physiology and optimal health. I would try and get that balance right.
Excellent. I wanna follow that one up with changing the scenario slightly. Let's say that same person, they're like, "Okay, I really prefer the dietary inputs I'm currently having, and they happen to be high in omega-6." Is there a path forward for them by just increasing their omega-3s where they
Yeah,
can kinda continue that high linoleic acid
yeah,
intake and s
yeah. Yeah. So, some people would argue they should actually, I mean, if the diet is really high in omega 6s, that they should consider ways to reduce their omega 6 intake. So, I mean, that is a choice people could have by changing some of the things they're eating. That might mean they're eating more omega 3 rich foods, which would be a good thing. But it might also mean actually they have to eat more saturated fat rich foods. Now, some people would argue that's not a good thing. So, again, it's all about choices and balances. Um, but something people might consider. So I mentioned so EPA and DHA. Um, fish is the main source. So I think adding fish to the diet of someone who, for a reason, wants to have a reasonably high omega 6 intake, that's not incompatible. I don't think. Um, so that could be managed. Using omega 3 supplements, of course, could be managed. But before I mentioned the plant omega 3s, so, you could have oils. So if someone is using, let's say, a lot of sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, they may want to consider oils that still have linoleic acid but contain also a reasonable amount of alpha linolenic acid. And, canola oil would be a good example. They might want to consider, flax seeds, chia seeds, using them in the diet, maybe within snacks, maybe on cereals, stuff like that. Um, of course, there's flaxseed oil.